Now, the big news that starts the F1 week for us here at Autosport today is that Rob Smedley is leaving Williams after 4 and a bit years with the team, I think. At the end of the 2018 season, he's going to move on and part ways with the team. Now, that news only came out this morning as we film this on Monday, and I've got Autosport's F1 editors Scott Mitchell and Ed Straw here with me to talk about it. Scott, you handled the story, and there were some whispers of this a week or two ago that Smedley might be moving on. What did we learn today when the team announced his upcoming departure?
Very little about what he's going to do next and what the team will do in response. Just that it seems to be a personal decision from Smedley. He's been in F1 I think since 2001, so 17 years on the road as a leading engineer or on race teams, and then obviously latterly with Williams a bit more behind the scenes, looking at sort of medium to long term stuff. So I think he wants to. He's got a young family, so spend a bit of time at home. Apparently, we don't have any. He says he hasn't made a decision on what he's doing next, and we know that Williams has been doing this bit of like behind the scenes rejigging over the course of the year as it works out how it got the 2018 car so badly wrong and what it needs to do next. So I think they'll probably take a bit of time before working out what they want to do. Right now, it's as simple as he's at the team at the moment and he won't be next year.
And it's another departure from sort of what we would consider the Williams technical team, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a third senior engineer that's left over this year. They've lost Edward and Dirk de Beer earlier this year, back in May. So they've had a period of stability since then. So a bit of a rejig on the aero side after, again, the 2018 car was so bad, lost all of its slipperiness in air and didn't have any of that downforce when it got to the corners. It's had aero stalls at times as well. It's been really difficult to understand. So they've had to go really deep in their analysis of what they did wrong so they don't prevent it. And I don't necessarily think Smedley falls into the same bracket necessarily as the changes earlier in the year.
So he's not been designing the bad car that's on the grid this year. But Ed, Smedley joined in 2014 following Felipe Massa, who he worked so closely with at Ferrari, and moved into a much more senior role rather than being a race engineer. Would it be perhaps wrong to say that he would take much of the responsibility for Williams' upturn in form that year? Because obviously 2014 and 15, two of the best years in Williams' recent history, and then it's all trailed off a bit since then.
I think it would be wrong to give him a vast amount of credit, but he was an important part of that. He did a lot of work in terms of the kind of trackside practices of the team, sharpening them up. Williams had fallen behind a bit on that, working on pit stops, that kind of thing. We've seen some pretty good pit stop work from Williams over the past few years. So I think he was a very important part of that new broom. Of course, Pat Simmons came in as the chief technical officer before Paddy Lowe. So yeah, he's been a significant part, and obviously his job was vehicle dynamics, so in terms of understanding where they're strong, where they're weak. And I think he's played a significant role in getting the team working well, and it's very important the way the factory connects to the car and vice versa, and you feed into each other. And I think he's certainly been able to do that. You know, he's a very sharp guy. He's a very good trackside engineer, if you want to look at it like that. Great success with Ferrari. So he will leave a legacy at Williams in terms of the sharpness of the way things are operating.
I mean, he obviously he's seen as joining alongside Felipe Massa. They were at Ferrari as a package and they went to Williams as a package, but Smedley joined after the first two races in 2014. I think he started work the week of the Bahrain Grand Prix, so presumably 2014 would have been as much about learning how that team operates and where it needs to improve and what he can bring to improve that. So he may well have had a sort of short-term impact in terms of sharpening it up, as Ed said, what the team was lacking, but it's sort of been a gradual process. And the way Williams has dropped off this year, and the way maybe it sort of slipped more into sort of regular midfielder rather than top of the midfield as it was in 14 and 15, there are more sort of fundamental problems behind the scenes, and as ever in F1, there's no one person to blame or one person. As much as he can't take all of the credit for putting them in a really good position a few years ago, he's also not the reason that they've fallen from grace now.
When push comes to shove, the big issue is downforce, it's aero. He's not an aerodynamicist, he's not there to do that. He feeds into it, but that's your number one performance differentiator. So yeah, to blame him for the slump would be extremely unfair, I think.
Now, he's clearly had an impact at trackside, but also back at base, and sometimes his role was much more based at the factory. But what do we think, given that you've talked about the legacy that he'll leave at Williams, does that mean they need a like-for-like replacement, or are expecting a bit more of a wider restructure of the technical makeup of the team now?
Well, given he moved to Williams in a role that was created for him, there's no necessarily not necessarily a need for a like-for-like replacement. They're not going to have a new head of vehicle performance or performance chief, as we like to call him. And as I said, Williams are engaging in this ongoing assessment of what went wrong and what needs changing. So it could be that the technical structure changes more emphatically. It could remain a bit fluid. They might rule by committee, or it may become a design dictatorship. I think they're still trying to work out exactly what's best for the long term, because they've got an opportunity now. They've had a statement intent on the driver's side, signing George Russell as a Formula 2 champion and Mercedes junior. So now they need to put everything in place. As they keep saying, they're really excited about what that guy can do behind the wheel, but they need to give him a half-decent car to actually see it.
There's a lot of work that's been done there under Paddy Lowe, looking at the processes that they go through. It's not just about the data you collect, it's how you use that data and how you analyse it and understand your design. Paddy Lowe, by his own admission, he's found it a little bit harder than he's thought, and I think maybe Paddy's very, very, very good at what he does. Perhaps if there was an error on his part, it was almost overreaching this season, in that we saw a car with a lot more detail, a lot more of that intricate interactions of aero parts.
Kind of like we see from the cars at the front of the grid.
Exactly. But the trouble is, you can kind of attempt to do that, but if you don't have the detail, research and analytical tools and everything to really excel in that, you can't deliver it. You can kind of deliver a low-res imitation of it. And I think what Paddy's been able to do is say, yeah, actually, we need to kind of take a step back, look at everything we're doing, how we're doing things, and make sure we kind of do the right version of the good concept, because it's all about tiny detail, tiny flecks and little aero exchanges of angles. They make huge difference, genuine vortexes. It's incredibly complicated. You've really got to know that one step follows another and all of your assumptions are correct to get the detail working, because sometimes a difference of a couple of degrees in angles can make all the difference. So that's where they are really, really focusing.
And that'll probably be a benefit for them, if there is one, of losing someone like Smedley. Because, okay, he will obviously bring something to the team. He wouldn't have lasted as long as he did at Ferrari as a race engineer if he didn't bring something to the team. But at the moment, their deficiency is on the aero side. So if they're trying to restructure the team, we know that they're losing quite a bit of funding, so they're trying to work out, right, what budget do we have, what goes where. Smedley is one of the sort of mainstream guys in F1. He had quite a lot of exposure at Ferrari. Everyone knows who he is. He's quite a well-known figure, and with that will come a reputation that you have to pay for. So on Williams' side, okay, it's a loss as a person, but maybe there's a way to use whatever money they were spending on Smedley somewhere else to fix their key deficiencies.
And I'm sure there'll be no lack of people willing to employ or wanting to employ Rob Smedley in the future. He's got a very good track record, a good way of working. He's good straight talking, so he's a great guy to kind of point at your team and say, right, what do we need to do? He's not afraid of ruffling feathers and straight talking, and he was always happy to take responsibility for things. So I think he's somebody who's still got, if he wants to, because he's been very successful in Formula 1, I'm sure he's made a reasonable amount of money, but if he wants to, I'm sure there'll be no shortage of teams who would be very, very interested in talking to him and bringing him on board in the future.